A Boeing 777 was accelerating down the runway in Las Vegas with 297 people on board when something in the left engine let go. 97 gallons of jet fuel spilled onto the runway in the next half-minute and caught fire. Every single person got out. The investigation into why took 3 years, and it starts inside a metal disc the size of a dinner plate. This is British Airways Flight 2276, and it is a story about a crack nobody was required to look for. The 8th of September, 2015. A Boeing 777-236 extended range, registration Golf Victor India India Oscar, powered by 2 General Electric GE90 engines. British Airways Flight 2276, McCarran International Airport, Las Vegas, bound for London Gatwick. 297 people, 157 passengers, 13 crew, and a relief pilot riding the jump seat for the long flight home. The G90 was, at the time, among the largest jet engines ever built for commercial service, over 11 feet across at the front fan, designed specifically to move a Boeing 777 across an ocean on 2 engines instead of 4. The captain taxied to an intersection takeoff, entering the runway partway down its length rather than at the very start. At 16:12 and 30 seconds, the aircraft turned onto the runway heading. 6 seconds later, takeoff power. 21 seconds into the takeoff roll. At 16:12:51.5, the cockpit voice recorder captured a bang. Within 2 seconds, a sound like an engine spooling down, the automated alert engine fail, and the captain's call, stop. The aircraft was at 77 knots. Its takeoff decision speed, the point past which a crew commits to flying rather than stopping, was 149. They were nowhere close to it, and they were already stopping. The report is precise about this. The captain made a timely decision to reject the takeoff, and performed the maneuver exactly as trained. The first officer noticed the thrust levers creeping forward on their own, the aircraft's autothrottle trying to restore takeoff power, and disconnected it. The captain did not apply maximum braking at first. He said afterward he initially thought a tire had burst. The fire. At 16:12:58, the fire warning bell sounded. The left engine fire light illuminated. The captain called for the engine fire checklist and told the first officer to notify the tower they were stopping on the runway. The aircraft came to a full stop at 16:13:07, 15.5 seconds after the bang. The first officer worked the engine fire checklist from memory. He moved the left fuel control switch to cutoff, then discharged the first fire extinguisher bottle. The checklist called for a 30-second wait before the second bottle. He fired it after 15. He said later he judged the evacuation could not wait. 28 seconds passed between the engine failure and the fuel supply finally being cut off. In that window, Boeing later estimated, about 97 gallons of jet fuel had spilled onto the runway and was feeding the fire. Then someone looked outside. The relief pilot left the flight deck, went into the cabin, and looked through a window. He saw black smoke with an orange glow. The glass beside him was starting to craze. Fine cracks spreading across its surface. A sign of heat and chemical exposure the window was not built to take silently. While he was there, a flight attendant told him she had already tried calling the flight deck. The cockpit voice recorder had picked up that call. Nobody answered it. Both pilots were occupied securing the engine and weighing whether to evacuate, and the call simply went unheard. Evacuate. The relief pilot returned to the flight deck. Doesn't look good to me. For seconds later, the captain said, I think there's too much fire. I think we've got to get out. At 16:14:23:32. Seconds after the bang, he made the call over the public address system. This is an emergency. This is the captain. Evacuate, evacuate. One engine was now shut down and on fire. The other was not shut down at all. The right engine kept running for 43 seconds after the evacuation began. The relief pilot was the one who noticed. He asked whether both engines were off, and the first officer said no. The jet blast from that still-running engine distorted two of the escape slides on the right side of the aircraft while people were using them. The captain had commanded the evacuation before running the evacuation checklist. Step 2 of that checklist is, shut down both engines. He tried to do it from memory instead of reading it from the manual, and he missed the step. Passengers and crew went out through 2 of the 8 available doors. The other 6 were judged unsafe, blocked by fire, smoke, or slides that had failed to inflate properly. The whole aircraft was clear in 2 minutes and 32 seconds. 1 flight attendant was seriously injured. 19 passengers had minor injuries. 277 people walked away with nothing worse than that. Video evidence showed some passengers leaving with carry-on bags. Flight attendants interviewed afterwards said it did not meaningfully slow anyone down. Most of it was grabbed in the seconds before the evacuation order, not during it, and firm commands at the doors stopped further retrieval. The investigators were not satisfied with that as a general answer. Carry-on baggage in an evacuation had already been flagged as a safety concern in a study 15 years earlier, and would be the subject of a formal recommendation 3 years after this one. The same recurring finding showing up again on a runway in Las Vegas, not yet fixed by policy. What actually broke? The failure began as a fatigue crack inside the high-pressure compressor. In a component called the Stage 8 disc, a metal disc buried deep inside the engine core, spinning thousands of times a minute at extreme heat and pressure. The manufacturer's own worst-case modeling predicted this part could take about 29,800 takeoff power cycles before a crack like this could even begin. This one had flown 11,459. The crack had been growing for roughly 5,400 of those cycles. Every remaining cycle before that was the slow, invisible process of the metal beginning to fail, the initiation phase, before there is anything a person could find, even looking directly at it. The investigation traced the mechanism precisely. A cyclic stress pattern with an extended hold time at high temperature, in an oxidizing environment, conditions that occur on every single takeoff, when an engine sits at full power under sustained load. Over years, that combination made the metal at the crack site brittle enough to fracture. The manufacturer had never seen this specific failure mode in this location before. Inspecting other engines afterward, it found no other cracks anywhere. So this was not a bad part. It was a location nobody had reason to suspect. There is a difference between how this failed and how metal usually fails from simple overuse, and it matters. A fatigue crack from ordinary wear tends to announce itself in ways inspectors know to look for. This crack formed through a process, sustained heat and stress oxidizing the metal's own grain boundaries, that GE said it had never previously seen occur under these specific conditions, in this specific location in any engine of this type. That is the difference between a maintenance failure and a discovery. Nobody skipped a step. The step did not exist yet, because nobody knew this particular failure was possible. 2 chances to catch it. The disc web, the specific surface where the crack started, was not an area that required routine inspection. The regulation defines a detectable crack as one at least 0.03 inches long on the surface. In September 2008, this engine's compressor was removed and fully disassembled for maintenance, exposing that exact surface. By the investigation's calculation, the crack would have measured about 0.05 inches at that point, already bigger than the detectable threshold. Nobody was looking because nothing said to look there. By June 2014, the compressor came out for maintenance again. This time it was not disassembled, the surface was never exposed. By then the crack had grown to roughly 0.19 inches. 2 overhauls 6 years apart, both touched this engine. Neither one was required to look at the one surface that would have shown the problem. After the accident, the manufacturer wrote new inspection procedures covering that exact surface, at every level from individual parts to the fully assembled engine. The other gap, the one in the checklist. British Airways engine fire checklist was built from Boeing's standard version, and it did not distinguish between a fire in the air and a fire on the ground. Step 3 shuts down the engine that's on fire. On the ground, with the aircraft stopped, there was no listed step telling the crew to also shut down the other healthy engine, or any note that some steps simply did not apply to this situation. The investigators wrote, if the checklist had specifically addressed a fire during ground operations, the crew could have secured the right engine sooner and decided to evacuate sooner. That exact gap had already been identified once before, in the investigation of a different accident entirely, American Airlines Flight 383, a year earlier. The NTSB had already written 2 safety recommendations addressing it before this report was even finished. One accident exposed a defect a manufacturer had never seen. A separate accident on a different airline in a different year exposed a gap in the paperwork that would have shortened this exact evacuation. The rule this accident reinforced already existed by the time it happened. It just had not reached every airline's checklist yet. The pilot who wasn't supposed to be doing anything. The relief pilot was in the jump seat for one reason, to let the 2 flying pilots rest on a long transatlantic sector. He had no assigned role in this emergency. He was the one who spotted the smoke and the crazing glass. He was the one who told the captain the fire still looked bad. He was the one who noticed, from the engine displays, that the right engine was still turning after the evacuation had begun. 3 separate times, in under 2 minutes, a person with no formal duty in the emergency supplied the piece of information the 2 flying pilots had missed. Nothing about this accident involved a mistake anyone could have prevented by trying harder. A metal disc failed in a way its own manufacturer had never encountered. It failed in the one place nobody was required to look, discovered on the runway instead of in a maintenance bay. And once it failed, a checklist written for the air did not quite fit an emergency on the ground, and cost the crew time they didn't know they were spending. 277 people are alive today for a straightforward reason. A captain who stopped the aircraft in time, cabin crew who read a burning runway correctly and picked the right 2 doors out of 8, and a third pilot with no job in the emergency who kept looking out the window anyway. Every figure in this video comes from NTSB Accident Report 201509008X35241, which is public and linked in the description. If there is an investigation you want us to read next, leave it in the comments.